All right. Thanking God this time simply for the chance to finish. Understanding that this week has not shaped up the way I would like for it to have. And all I got time for now is to get done. So hopefully the benefit for everybody else will be shorter summaries. But in the spirit of shorter summaries, let's just name this chapter Find Out. In a chapter that begins and ends with God being provoked by the actions of the people of Judah. And even though we have seen that in previous chapters, he is going to take pains now to let Ezekiel see exactly what has been going on to provoke him to where he is about to go. Verses 1-4 saying there is a time and space dilemma for Ezekiel, understanding that he is in Babylon. God is going to come to him in the spirit again and take him to be able to see what's going on back home in Judah and specifically Jerusalem at the temple, as the first 4 verses talk about his interaction with God, which takes him to roughly around verse 3, the gateway of the inner court that faces north, where the seat of the image of jealousy, which provokes to jealousy, is seated. That stated, he's going to go on in verses 5 and 6 to talk about some of the things that each individual, maybe not each personally, but each group of individuals is basically going to have carved out a space in God's house for their own version of the truth. Once again, carrying on in verses 5-6, we're going to get a different perspective of the image of jealousy, this time from the north or north of the altar gate. And when I looked up different maps of where these things were taking place around the altar and the temple, I didn't find any 2 maps that seem to come to the same conclusion. And so I'm going to give you my perspective on it, not necessarily, as we say sometimes, completely understanding how this works out. But from my understanding of the way that the temple is laid out, it seems that he is giving Ezekiel a vision of what is going on north of the east gate, or the gate that faces the altar, as you would come into the standard or primary entrance, even though he has entered through the north gate. So picturing it, I don't know how to do it this way, but from your perspective, he's coming from the top, if we're going to say that's the north, and then he's coming from the east, computer way, and he enters here. But when he says look north, the odd thing is he's looking north, but it seems that what he's given wherever he ends up landing is going to give him a picture of what is going on up here above the entrance facing the altar. All that to say, he is basically at that point going to seem to see a great image that's set up called the image of jealousy. However, going on in verses 7-13, he is going to seem to describe 2 things. This time, verse 7, and he brought me to the entrance of the court, where he is going to seem to go in and see in verse 10 engraved on the wall around what verse 9 is generally going to describe as vile abominations, before moving on in verses 11-13 to focus on the elders in the house, or of the house of Israel, describing in verse 12 the way that the elders of the house of Israel are, or what they are doing in the dark, each in his room of pictures, which some of the maps I consulted seems to describe the way that the chambers surrounding the temple proper, which have been used for various purposes related to the sacrifices and the work of God at the temple, had now been converted to space or office space for each of them to honor whatever image or version of the truth they saw fit. As we took time on Wednesday to give credit to our elders and our leaders who make it possible for us to talk about these passages candidly, because they are not running from the passages, but they're saying to the degree that God has spared us the condemnation that he is bringing to the leadership here in Judah, we praise God. But to the degree we as preachers or whoever need to make change, we thank God likewise for him giving us the opportunity to make the changes necessary to avoid the consequences we see him bringing to the leadership in Judah. So hats off to the leadership here and everywhere, to the degree we don't have to feel awkward about discussing passages like this as we go on to see the way that God addresses the rest of Judah in the things that they were doing at the temple. Verses 14 and 15, talking about the way that the Women were weeping for Tammuz, another one of their idols, or for lack of a better term, another one of their versions on reality or versions of the truth. That taking place, verses 14 through 15, taking place at the entrance of the north gate. Verses 16 through 18, the end of the chapter, saying that as he brought him into the inner court of the house of the Lord, at the entrance of the temple, between the porch and the altar, there were about 25 men worshiping the sun toward the east. Once again, going back toward that east gate, understanding that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Seems like they were facing the sun to worship it as it was rising or early in the day. Verse 17, reminding us much as the chapter began. I'll just read it. Then he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations that they commit here, that they should fill the land with violence and provoke me still further to anger? Verse 18, going on to say, therefore I will act in my wrath. And of all the things that caught my attention about this chapter, the one that really sticks with me, at least at this point, is the way in which God's people seemed to get their way by simply doing whatever they wanted until God went silent. Understanding that his silence didn't represent absence, yet it simply represented a low-key presence. And the more they ended up doing whatever they wanted to do, clinging to their version of the truth, the more they were provoking the God who was low-key still around the entire time. Reminding me of a different version of the modern saying, the more you play around, the more you find out. Something that the people of Judah are about to find out in the next chapter.